Thanks again, Fiona. Whilst the panel's just settling in, I just want to take this moment to acknowledge the traditional owners of the land that we meet on, this beautiful land. So the Gadigal people of the Eora Nation. I want to pay my respects to their elders past, present and future. And I'm also really conscious that we have the graveyard shift here. So what I want you to do is to all stand up, including the panelists. We're going to stand up, just do some stretching. I was encouraged by, so Greg at Alligator Energy, someone in his organisation gave me a little tip that he likes salsa dancing. So I just want you to just do a little bit of a salsa dance before you sit down. So if you can just wave your hips. Don't know if you know about this, Greg. Okay, just stretch yourself out and sit down. Hopefully you're all energised now. So we have a really exciting panel for this afternoon. So we're going to be discussing alternative decarb strategies to reduce emissions in mining. And it's a topic that has been covered a lot today and yesterday as well. But hopefully we've got some really fresh perspectives, and we've got some perspectives from different types of mine and across operations. So I reflected in my presentation earlier on some of the key drivers to decarbonise. So the climate emergency, disclosure, legislation, access to capital as well, which I wouldn't mind getting into in a bit more detail. And then what's happening in technological availability as well, so we'll discuss that. And the IEA has commented that there's been rapid progress in parts of the energy transition and clean tech availability, but it's not all there yet. And for mining, there's simplistic parts of the equation, but there's also challenges as well. So I'd really like to get into that with the panel, like what are they actually seeing globally and across Australia, and where's some real innovations as well that they can draw from. I also want to think about materiality as well. So thinking about, where's the best bang for buck and in terms of emissions footprint. And then the pitfalls of taking that technology-led approach. So, potentially backing the wrong horse. So, how we can actually go through a process of working out where the best technology is. And I just want to close this intro with a scary number. So 2030 is 5 years, 2 months and 2 days away. And on that subject, I'm then going to, and on that scary number, I'm going to hand to Katie. So Katie has the enviable challenge of helping Fortescue to reach real net zero by 2030. So that's without offsets. So that's, I think Mehrud reflected that it was possibly mission impossible or mission very difficult. Can you tell us a little bit more about what you've got planned for Fortescue to realise that target?
Yeah, absolutely. So firstly, I think it is definitely mission possible, and it's actually my job to, I've got the integrated program schedule and so on, so it's definitely possible. I think we've probably got one of the most ambitious heavy industrial decarbonisation programs in the world, and I'm going to keep saying that at conferences, and hopefully someone's going to tell me, no, there's someone else out there. But I think FAusIMM maybe, they've got pretty good stuff ahead of them. So we burn over 800 million litres of diesel a year in our operations. By 2030, we'll be emitting over 3 million tonnes of carbon. And we're going to, our decarbonisation plans essentially to eliminate all the diesel and gas and fossil fuels that we use in our operation. To do that, we need to build about 2 gigawatts of wind and solar, install about 4 to 5 gigawatt hours of battery storage. We need to replace over 700 units of heavy mobile equipment which currently burn diesel. We need to build 750 kilometres of transmission lines, and we need to roll out electrical infrastructure across all of our sites, including 6 megawatt fast chargers that hopefully will charge our trucks in 30 minutes. And probably more importantly, we're implementing quite a lot of doing a lot of work on green systems, so the systems you need to plan and manage your operations in an energy-constrained world. We have had some really exciting announcements over the past month. We announced a $2.8 billion partnership with Liebherr, a partnership with McLean to develop battery electric graders, signed a contract with Genus to build our site infrastructure for our first site, and our first battery farm for decarbonisation, so it's 250 megawatt hours of battery storage as well. And I think reflecting on, people are always quite surprised that when we announce these sorts of things that we're actually doing stuff now, and I think on your point around 2030 is actually not very far away, and I think if you're credible and you want to be credible about actually getting somewhere by 2030, you absolutely have to have the plans in place and be doing things right away.
Yeah, it's incredibly admirable, and the fact you've actually got a costed plan and there's moves on the ground and you've actually got infrastructure in place. It's fantastic to see, and the rest of the market is definitely looking. Just want to ask Mark and Tom, you've got some good perspectives that you could probably share globally and also in different mining sectors as well. So what are some key trends and influences that you're seeing elsewhere? So, in other parts of the mining sector and also globally. So Mark, I'll go to you first, and then Tom, if you can consider that question as well.
Yeah, I think as Katie said, the tier one miners are already announcing where they want to be in 25 years' time. It isn't very far away at all, and I guess that is ultimately being led by expectations from shareholders, from probably green finance groups that you're currently engaged with, but also what we're seeing in the mining industry is no different to all the industries when it comes to, and I was up on stage presenting before, but Scope 1, Scope 2 emissions, and whether we like it or not as a mining industry, probably there's more pressure on just about us than any other industry, because the perception is that everyone has deep pockets. So obviously, what we're seeing globally in other industries, mining needs to be seen to be leading from the front from that perspective. And I'm not going to get into all the geopolitics and everything like that, but there are obviously factors that are affecting all sorts of areas of mining currently. And then also we mentioned that financing piece, that amount of sort of investment with Leap Air, for example. I'm not sure that's a huge amount of working capital that they need. So the financing aspect is the other one coming into play there, to be able to allow them to scale up their operations, I'm sure, to be able to deliver on such high volumes, such high production levels. So Scope 1, 2, 3 emissions, the bit of geopolitics is happening in the world, and then the financing aspect as well. How are we going to finance these RES projects? Mobile equipment, but also the infrastructure as well.
Yeah, are you seeing a lot of organisations tap into sustainable finance in this region?
Hearing that it's around a lot. We haven't been directly involved ourselves, but I guess we have developed an electric light vehicle probably 2 or 3 years ago, and it was a really well designed vehicle, underground spec'd, but it just got to the point where I guess we as a business had to decide, directors, shareholders, are we willing to invest the capital needed to get this into full scale production? Full scale production for us was only 50 to 100 vehicles a year, but still a fairly significant investment for a company like us. If we had have had the opportunity with a green investment fund 2 or 3 years ago, and that might still be reignited if there's anyone out there, but if we had that opportunity back 2 or 3 years ago for someone to back in, because you need a new workshop, you need a production line, we need to recruit the skills are necessary. Car manufacturing in Australia has moved out of the country, so it was a really big business case behind it, and ultimately we made the decision that we didn't want to invest the capital that was required.
Yeah, we heard from one of the McKinsey speakers earlier about the sheer volume of capex that's required for the transition. It's enormous, and for an organisation like yourself, it's real dollars and real change. Tom, if I can ask you to reflect on some of these global learnings. You're based in the UK. Can you also just do a brief intro to yourself as well? So Katie from Fortescue and the background to Fortescue, probably a bit more familiar, and Mark's just spoken previously. So if I can ask the three other panellists as well to just do a very brief intro to who you are and what your organisation does as well when you're responding.
No problem. Nice to be here. So Tom Harper, I work for Baker Hughes. We're a global energy technology company. We employ 55,000 people across the world. been going for over 100 years, and we employ some of the most advanced technologies to help drive energy reduction and reliability across the industrial and energy markets. I think to your question of learnings from the sector, I think for mining, it's going to probably go through a very similar approach to many sectors, that efficiency is one of the first areas that I would suggest the industry really looks at. And that can be as simple as existing technologies that are proven, but people taking a different approach to actually understanding the carbon impact as well as the cost impact. But we look at all sectors, they're all going through their plans and their pathways, and they're all slightly different. But that efficiency piece for today, I think, are the options that everyone seems to be moving ahead with. It's a way of saving emissions, and actually, it's a prudent way of running your business. Now, unfortunately, you can't efficiency everything, and there's some really hard to abate emissions, and this is where I think the mining sector in particular has got a very unique play by the sheer scale of demand that you can actually provide. So for us as a technology provider, one of the challenges we often come into is that there's lots of ambitions, but absent that scale of demand, it's really difficult sometimes to support customers and get the actual viability of the projects off the ground. So I applaud Fortescue for some of their moves here. If you look at it from a regulatory standpoint, that scale of demand gives you far more financeable or incentive-driven support. From a technology standpoint, there's a lot of demand for our internal dollars to support these programs, and where you've got a route to scale, it does just help everything move along. So the industry, I think, is going to follow a very similar trend to everybody on efficiency, and I think there's some great opportunities we're seeing in mining there. But on those hard to abate, I do think that scale gives mining a really interesting angle, but it requires probably a very different approach than maybe traditionally has been applied.
Thanks for that, Tom. So, Greg, if you can just introduce yourself, and I'd really like to understand a bit more about what you're doing at the Samphire mine in Whyalla. So, you've got, I think, big plans, and you're really looking at, how this could be a game changer in terms of, a mine that really sort of responds to this net zero agenda. So, if you can tell us a bit more about.
Thanks, Janine, and thanks everyone. Yeah, Alligator Energy is a company that's been in uranium exploration for many years, but we have acquired and are developing a project just to the south of Whyalla in South Australia. This is an in-situ recovery uranium project, similar to those uranium projects that have been operating for nearly 25 years to the east of the state. The advantage that that region has around Whyalla, it's got a great combination of renewable power resources, wind and solar. It's far enough north to get good solar. It's still on the coasts of the Gulfs where it gets good wind. To take advantage of that, we've got some opportunities we're going to look at during our feasibility study next year. The first is in situ recovery or solution mining. You don't physically move, mine or crush the rock. You're mining and extracting the uranium out with the groundwater and recirculating it. So the power draw is low. It's pumps, tanks, pipes, that sort of thing. The second opportunity is we're 20 kilometres from Whyalla, a centre with serviced by power. We can use a whole electric fleet. We don't need haul trucks, we don't need major equipment, so we can have a whole electric fleet. The third opportunity is potentially electric drilling, but we have to drill up to 100-metre large production wells. So it's not quite as easy as blast holes or exploration holes. So that's different technology that we have to investigate. The next opportunity is logistics. There are prime mover electric trucks being trialled where we could bring all our logistics into the site and out of the site with electric trucks. Now, in capital construction, Hallett are starting to investigate alternative types of fly ash and cement. Can we construct our site? Now, there's a single reason why this is of value to our shareholders. Certain utilities, in particular nuclear utilities in Europe, are evaluating under their scope emission requirements by the EU, what is the value of uranium supply as a supply to us under their scope emissions, and are we willing to pay more for it? So EDF for France, Electricity de France, already talk with their suppliers about increasing their value, in other words, their price for a supply product, if they show a reducing carbon emission associated with that product. So in the EU in particular, there is an opportunity to get a premium pricing, potentially, by designing a mine from scratch. Now, it just happens we are 4 years away from production, potentially. We have to go through approval. We have to go through a range of things. But the trial mine we'll be establishing next year will tell us a lot of this. Whether it's economic, totally, we don't know. But we're going to do it in parallel to a feasibility study to have a look.
Yeah, so I've often heard that referred to as a greenium, so a green premium. So that's really interesting that uranium's attracting that, and you're seeing that sort of market trend. Chris, I want you to reflect on what Tom said about efficiency. And we often think about technology and jump to a sort of technology type solution. Is there anything you can think of, or do you want to just discuss? What can be done when we actually think about, efficiency and thinking about systems across a mine?
Yep, so I'm Chris Catania, I'm from MEC Mining, so I'm a mining engineer in the room. A little bit different in the spin and this perspective, so it's very much attached to the mining phase where I bring my perspectives from. But the consulting work that we do spans the big majors, also all the way down to the smaller miners. And the one thing that is uniform across all areas of the industry is just on operating efficiency. If we looked at the span of productivity over the last 10 years in Australia, we've actually seen degrading performance. And it's sort of, as we get good mining cycles, the performance progressively degrades. And then as we get a difficult time, then it obviously bounces back and everyone improves their overall efficiency. And so we've done some global studies for major mining houses around their fleet and the best use of their capital. And the key piece that sticks out is that overall efficiency of just operating any equipment is quite low compared to where it can be. So a lot of the technology gains that people are identifying, whilst that solves things, it's hard to not bake the operational improvement into it. And then we're having a quick conversation earlier on the topic about there are significant changes. A lot of the fleets we examine, there's 5 up to 10% improvement in overall efficiencies, which would then obviously move straight down into an emissions assessment. And really that's just bringing the productivity back to what it should be. Australia is operating, I think the average fleet's maybe 5,700 operating hours an open pit truck, but really in other parts of the world 6,300 is respectable. And so we're talking about a significant scale of efficiency, and even speaking about steel and the life cycle, if you can get more out of that fleet, you can run them for longer, you can keep them operating efficiently, you're going to make a dent in that overall piece. And then the question is now saying, let's assess the system from that start point as to where we apply technology. And I think that's the piece that, for me, whilst Fortescue is on the very forefront and actually changing, others who are following really need to assess how can they make the quicker transition and then look at alternative fuels and things like that to get them through those stages, because they're going to follow others. And that's quite a different take, depends on where you sit in the technology cycle.
Yeah, definitely. I think there's some probably low-hanging fruit in there that could be looked at. Have others on the panel experienced where there could be these low-hanging fruit efficiency gains? There's been a bit of criticism about as the commodity price increases, the miners get almost fat and lazy and don't think about how they can actually drive productivity and efficiency, which also includes energy efficiency and others. Are there others on the panel that have a view on?
Yeah, I can go. We're in parallel. Some of our decarbonisation projects that we're putting in place will take a while. So it doesn't, you can't develop a solar farm overnight. You can't develop a battery electric truck overnight, but you can put in place some, energy efficiency projects. So I think all of our employees have energy efficiency targets, like we have production and cost targets at the moment. So there's a really strong focus in the operations to really look at what they can do. And at the moment it's a diesel fleet, so it's not stuff that's particular to battery electric, but the more that we can bring down the energy required across our operations, the less wind and solar and batteries that we need to build, so the cheaper the cost of our decarbonisation programs are. So I guess I'd encourage everyone in the room to look at that as the first step. And I think the other thing that we've found because we've been putting so much focus on the development and the productivity of the haul trucks that we're working on for a battery electric version in partnership with Liebherr, just the scrutiny over the, time usage model and the lost time and productivity, even just of our diesel fleet, has actually shed a bit of light on areas that, we could improve in terms of productivity, which the teams are now working on putting in place.
Yeah, thanks for that. So maybe Mark, if you can have a think about, the mining sector's been around for a long period of time, and and I'm sure all the panelists have been in the mining sector for a significant period of time. What are you seeing that the mining sector already has from an asset perspective that could be really utilised productively for the whole net zero agenda?
What do they already have? I think Chris and Katie touched on. I think, FMG are at the forefront. They're designing and lead full battery electric vehicles. But what we already have is a lot of diesel combustion engines out there. Miners' KPIs are about, it seems to be about reducing diesel. So what are the technologies out there, as you both sort of touched on, that can reduce that by 10, 20, 30% on your diesel combustion engines before we get to the full electric or hydrogen or whatever that type of technology looks like. And there are a lot out there. We've spoken to a couple of, not hydrogen injection, but hydrogen replacement, or I won't get the terminology right, but some really basic technology retrofits onto engines that can save fuel consumption now. So I think that's what as miners we can take those small incremental steps and back some of these technology providers in.
Yeah, Tom, have you got any views on that? I know you do some work in hydrogen. Anything on the sort of technology or the asset base that the mining sector already has that could be looked at?
I'd just come back to that scale component. I say we work across so many industries where the challenge for finding bankable programs to do decarbonisation is you're constantly tailoring, and the level of demand that mining can provide for electrification, helping develop, I think Dino spoke on the first day, huge scale electrification is underpinning every single one of those pathways in the way which you'll decarbonise, regardless of if it's hydrogen or if it's going full battery electric truck. So I'll just come back to that commercial lever that the mining sector has, that there really are very few in the world that have that centralised demand. So if the industry can get comfortable with the slightly different procurement and partnering regimes, everyone talks about collaboration, and it really comes down to how you procure, how you balance risk, and how you all probably adapt your models. If it can harness those two assets together, I think there's a really interesting opportunity for mining to maybe be at the forefront of some of those markets. So rather than the technologies, again, we'd come back to the commercials and making it viable through the scale that we have.
Yeah. So Greg and Chris, there's an overwhelming theme in this whole, in the whole of IMARC about collaboration and partnerships. Have you got any reflections on partnerships that you think would work really well that you'd like to see in the market?
There's some basic ones that you can start with straight away. As an example is we're using diesel generators on site now. We'll be running a trial in-situ mine in the first 6 months next year. We're looking at simple things like a company that has large diesel generators or reasonable size that's converted them to running on biofuel or cooking oil, just waste, tip it in one end, starts on diesel, runs on cooking oil, fine. So there's simple partnerships like that you can start straight away. There's technologies out there you can grab, immediately start to trial things. Now that's sustainable, not renewable, but it's still good to try. At the other end of the scale, we've got an NDA in place with one of the largest renewable companies in the world who are looking in that Whyalla region for significant wind towers. Now, we've already, in partnership with our technical team, given them the detailed coordinates of our known paleochannels that host our uranium. So if they want to lay out a wind farm, they can do it on the ground where we don't have paleochannels. So you'll have, hopefully in the future, an in-situ recovery uranium mine producing uranium at very low levels of greenhouse gas emissions with 400-metre towers over the top of it. Now, that sort of partnership and making use of them straight away is of extremely value. And the state government loves it. That concept of interrelated industries working together is fantastic.
Yeah, hopefully we see a lot more of that. Chris, have you seen any sort of partnerships or got any reflections on those key partnerships that you like to see?
Yeah, absolutely. I think there's probably in different regions you're seeing a need for, I suppose, a combined buying approach or combined processing approach. So we work with 3 of the 4 vanadium projects that are in development in Queensland, for example. And if you looked at trying to compete on multiple projects in a region like that, or where you've got smaller assets around, it's getting more difficult to find huge assets that will support all of the capital that they need. So when you've got regional groupings and you've got new areas of development around Australia, trying to get those partnerships and collaboration and making it actually possible for people to not need to have a competitive landscape, but have a way that they can essentially supply the best output, that's a big opportunity. And especially in the smaller regions, obviously we've got a very well-developed iron ore industry, but if you go back to Queensland, it's an interesting environment where we're talking about, coal miners next door. It's very competitive, even though the blend between their coal would actually improve the overall efficiency of what they're doing. It would reduce emissions, it would reduce capital and steel. And so just from a general sustainable development approach, and even just capital intensity, there are significant areas of improvement, but it's not actually something that our government or our industry is doing particularly well about bringing collaboration between projects together. It's still focused on competition, and it's actually making it difficult to really advance, even though the whole industry could move forward much more quickly and get to better solutions if there was more of an open source type model attached to some of these learnings. I have no idea how that gets solved, but it's definitely one where you're seeing multiple clients trying to solve the same problem right next door to each other. And it's a challenging place to sit and keep your mouth pinned.
That's a shame, because I was just going to ask you, how do you actually solve that? Has anyone on the panel got any thoughts on how you solve that significant challenge?
Yeah, we are notorious at keeping stuff to ourselves. We don't necessarily like to share. Even research organisations don't like to share because they live off the IP and the commerciality of it. I think we have to get over that. We have to get over the fact we think we've got the best ideas in the world and say, let's be open here, let's share stuff. And we got this idea, what do you got? That's simple. You just got to be brave enough, and your CEO's got to be brave enough to do it.
Yeah, definitely. A while ago, I actually went to the York Railway Museum in the UK, and I was reflecting on Robert Louis Stevenson, who invented the first successful trial of a locomotive, and that was actually a technology challenge. So he was trying to win a prize there. And we've seen it with the Charge on Challenge, and I think there's mechanisms like that maybe will be game-changing sort of approaches to collaboration to get those to get that funding up front. So I just wanted to come back to Katie, and I was going to say, I don't know how you sleep at night with this sort of 5 years, 2 months and 2 days challenge hanging over you. So what do you see some of the key challenges, but also on the flip side, where are the opportunities as well for Fortescue?
Yeah, there's lots of challenges. No, I think, honestly, for us, at the stage that we're at with the program now, one of the key challenges and the things that's kind of holding up our program is just the approvals. Like, it really takes quite a long time to get through the various layers of approvals. The land that we're looking to access is on a range of different, traditional owner lands. So we're working with them really closely, but it's just a time. You've got to walk every square metre of the land to make sure you're not building a wind turbine where you shouldn't, and so on. So it's a time and an approvals kind of process. I'm sure when we get into more the construction phase, we'll run into all sorts of logistical challenges trying to get in 100-metre long wind turbines down Great Northern Highway to our wind project site, and I'm sure there'll be a range of challenges that come up. But honestly, it's more at Fortescue. It's definitely seen more as an opportunity. Like, it's a really wonderful, galvanising opportunity for our workforce. Like, there's so many people, actually all the people from Fortescue who have spoken, including our CEO, Dino, have joined Fortescue because we are decarbonising at such a rapid pace. And I think having a really clear, very, very unambiguous target around, real zero, so you're not getting off the hook with, offsets and so on, really helps with just focusing everyone's attention on you actually need to solve the challenge and find the best technical solution before 2030, not, at some point in the future. And I think it just really removes kind of the ambiguity. And so that's, I guess, in the decarb program, it's really wonderful having such an aggressive target because there's just so much stuff that we can rule out because it's just not going to be ready in time. And then, not having the opportunity to use offsets is actually, hard, but also good in a way because, we know that we've got to find, and there are technical solutions out there, so we've just got to choose the most cost-effective one for every single step in our, value chain and so on that uses fossil fuels. So it's just a matter of assigning a smart person to all of those little bits and off they go and, find a solution. I think also for Fortescue, we see it as a, really big business opportunity as well to decarbonise ourselves, but also to help other companies decarbonise and go into selling, green technology and green products like our Fortescue Zero, which looks at, is developing the battery power systems to go in the Liebherr trucks and so on.
So major market opportunities beyond, your own footprint. And Greg, you reflected on some of the market opportunities as well from a sort of greenium perspective. Are there other opportunities that you can see out there, and others on the panel as well? Let's really think about the positives. Where are those opportunities that the mining sector can really grab by the horns?
Well, in the global market, you get different geopolitical emphases, if you like. And at the moment, there's a geopolitical shift in nuclear fuel supply, for example, from Russia, which provided 40% and 30% of the European and US material. And now the shift of that is moving to Western countries which have better controls and understanding and mechanisms for at least productivity and focusing on carbon emissions. So you're pulling out of African mines, out of old Eastern European mines and into the more modern mines. So you're getting a shift geopolitically. It's caused by other factors, but it's happening. The other thing is you're getting a lot of investment direct from governments into the minerals required for this shift. So the small companies in particular that I know are focusing on those minerals which are going to attract government support. Some combined investment into exploration, which means there's a better discovery. Vanadium is a particular one, antimony is another one. There's just a range of minerals that small explorers are starting to look. So you're driving, if you put the right incentives in place, you drive the right behaviour towards the minerals that you want. We were talking about it before that 90% of the certain commodities that we need in this industry are coming out of China. And we're going to have to develop opportunities to produce them to the level of quality we need in our own countries.
Can I just add to that? I was going to say on that point about the fuel price volatility and coming out of Russia and other places in the world was actually one of the key drivers, I guess, for Fortescue as well. We're a commodity business, so we can't really control the price that we get for our ore, but what we can control is our cost base, and obviously diesel's a really significant part of our cost base. So we see it as a quite a great. We would love everyone to decarbonise as fast as us as well, but also a great competitive advantage to really have more control over our cost base of our product for the future.
Yeah, I reflected in my presentation earlier about the energy scarcity issue as driving a huge amount of behavioural change and organisational change in Europe, and we haven't had some of those pressures. I'm interested to hear from others on the panel as well. Greg, you just reflected on some, a really good example of where there could be government intervention. Is there other examples that others on the panel would like to see in terms of government or other stakeholder intervention to aid the decarbonisation agenda?
I've got a long list.
You go, Tom.
I think just the level of regulatory certainty is actually important. I think a large percentage of the Western world's gone through an election this year, and I think just in the UK where I'm from, the difference in political sphere put a stop on it, not a stop, but pause on a lot of initiatives. So I think that political uncertainty is not easy when you're making long-term investments. I think I would come back more to how we all need to operate. I think partnership or collaboration has been said 1,000 times in the last 2 days. What that actually means is a change in the balance of risk, a change in the way services are procured, and a change in the relationship between the way we partner and then working with regulators. And there's no quick fix to that, but I think if I could have one piece on the major projects that we all decide we're going to go after that are big enough, they require transformation, they require subsidy, the certainty, and then the long-term planning around the regulatory support mechanisms give everybody the ability to walk step by step, but you can do it together. If you get changes at any point within that, somebody within that chain really will struggle to make it viable. So regulatory certainty, and then probably a bit more of a commercial change for how we all partner in reality.
You got any reflections, Mark, or hand it to Katie?
Yeah, look, regulator certainty, I think we keep hearing about, we do hear about these critical mineral projects and how they're sitting on a particular government list in terms of we should be expediting these. I just question whether we're moving fast enough. Where a few projects, one particularly in Victoria, should have received a mining permit and licence by now. And I know some feedback coming from the federal government is that they don't have enough resources to process these applications. So, look, if that is the case, I'm sure these mining companies and shareholders of the mining companies would love to assist in any way to give them the resources to give them the permit to then go out and mine.
Yeah, we saw in Western Australia in the big iron ore boom, there was organisations were paying for the regulator to have someone to assist with the permitting for another organisation, so they weren't involved in that particular organisation, but they were looking at mechanisms to aid government in that backlog. They didn't have anything to do with the permitting and approvals associated with their own mine, but yeah, there's possibly mechanisms that maybe Victoria or others can look at. Katie, you had some
a long list
potential reflections.
I think, yeah, the approvals point's a really significant one, and I think I'd like to see, I guess, the government do a clearer job of planning, I guess, the land. Like, we know what we need to build for our, 2 gigawatts of wind and solar, and it's a, significant kind of land area, but then you just think about, in our area in the Pilbara, there's Rio, there's BHP, there's all the other miners, and then we start talking about green iron, and I don't get the sense in WA anyway that there's a really clear kind of, well, what land do we, where does this renewable resource go? What's the transmission infrastructure that we need to connect that, and that kind of, I guess, planning of for WA at least, which is what I'm familiar with, the overall energy infrastructure to support a 2050 decarbonised economy. So that's one thing, and I won't talk for too long. But I guess the other thing for me, particularly in my role, I look at the business case around decarbonisation. The fact that we have, and I think Dino mentioned it yesterday when he spoke, this diesel fuel tax credit, which effectively reduces by the cost that we pay for diesel, which is basically the benefits of decarbonisation is the elimination of diesel. It is, like, as a taxpayer, offensive to me that I'm essentially subsidising the continued use of fossil fuels rather than that incentive going into renewable energy or something that's actually supporting the energy transition.
Yeah, so some of those macro level interventions that government could make that,
Yeah, I mean, it completely opposes the safeguard mechanism and the carbon price that we have to incentivise when you've actually got, a rebate. And I don't necessarily mean that we should get rid of it for everyone. I think the Clean Energy Finance Corporation have got a good model around that, that it should be limited, but there needs to be something done about that because it really outweighs any benefit under the safeguard mechanism.
Yeah, it certainly doesn't make sense from the pub test, I'd say, on that particular one.
It's like the third biggest line on the federal budget is diesel fuel tax credit.
Yeah, it's slightly odd. Chris, I'm wondering how do we bring some of these stakeholders and employees and partners and organisations that you work with, how do you actually bring them on board to aid with this whole agenda? I mean, we're hearing from Fortescue who's driving the agenda. How do you how do you engage with, you know, your sort of client base, and how do you bring all these different partners together?
Yeah, I think it's an interesting problem, because without pushing to having a KPI that sits at every level of the organisation, people sit there and say, well, what's in it for me? You know, it's the basic agenda. If you want to put change in an organisation, you need to get everyone on board and say there is still a level of personal impact that needs to be attached in some way. Purpose-driven organisations are winning the game around the world, and so really it's, you know, obviously you'll attract the right people, but to get change across an entire industry, I think it takes a hell of a lot more. The certainty piece is definitely one that sort of connects to that same last question too. We've got clients who they were rushing to put environmental approvals in the week before the election because they know that'll get in Queensland, because they were trying to make sure that it'll get treated differently if it went in the week before as opposed to the week later when the new government's in transition, because there'll be a different mandate. But if it lodged that day, and I suppose, yeah, that's influencing departments in the government to actually push approvals through. It's changing how organisations are engaging with government. It's changing how employees are being told to execute upon their job, as opposed to getting the right solution. Hey, we haven't got the best outcome for the environment, so we're still going to put it in a week early, because that's going to change how we're going to be treated from, you know, transitioning government. So uncertainty from the government is creating, you know, uncertainty in organisations, and as a result, leaders will struggle to keep that clarity of the vision, you know, in front of the team for them to actually deliver and get on board with that journey. I think for me, if you can't articulate the way it's going because you have too many moving factors, our geopolitical environment, you know, clients that we've got in Africa have a very different view to Australia. It's interesting, some of the Indian companies that are invested across Brazil and Africa and Australia, they're actually, you know, stepping back from what they do here. It used to be easier. Now it's actually becoming more difficult. You can deal with corruption because it's predictable. It's very difficult to deal with a government that is changing the game or not really committed or understanding the targets they're setting. We've got targets in Australia, but I don't know if anyone's done the metal balance to say it's actually possible to achieve what our government has put forward, because, you know, from a high level, there's not enough metal supply to meet the demand. So as a result, you've got a target that everyone expects to fail. And until organisations can have a better vision, if the governments can set a better vision and a staged transition, I think that that's going to be difficult to get everyone bought in. That's, you know, quite a general system overview. But
yeah, I'll make some comment on that. As CEOs or as leaders of organisations, you get KPIs, you get targets set by a board or a controlling group, which are both short and long term. And I think we need to have that expectation of long-term targets. Sometimes they're hard to put in place because you've got an investment community which is thinking shorter and shorter. They want a performance every 3 or 6 or 9 months. But nonetheless, both at the executive level in companies, you need to have those long-term targets and articulate them. But I think we should also start to put some pressure on our politicians to have their own KPIs for their term, and KPIs and advancing key things for their state or country beyond their term. And let's have a measure of what they achieve in their term to advance that stuff, because it's a critical thing they're going to be measured by. At the moment, they're pretty term-focused, not beyond term-focused. And as we know, it's probably about 12 years to get a full mine approval from the time you have a potential resource through. So you've got to think long-term in our industry. We need our approvals people to be able to think long-term with us. Now, that could be as simple as holding a team of experienced people while you wait for an approval has got a cost, and there's a recognition of that cost. So there is a reason why you should keep getting the horsepower into the processes that you need. So there's that way of thinking long-term, which the decarbonisation approach has to have. It's not short-term, it's long-term. So we have to get that long-term target thinking going in all spheres, I think.
Yeah, it's interesting that the private sector, you know, is all based on KPIs and, you know, and actually having that clear performance management framework, but, you know, we don't really see it in government quite to the same extent. Tom, have you got any reflections on, you know, that whole, basically how can we think differently, you know, across the mining sector, and, you know, how do we actually need to change, you know, who we are as organisations to help with that agenda? And, you know.
So again, leaning in more and more into the sector. I'd say the one observation, where I've chatted with several people on this so far this week, is maybe the structure of the industry has a lot of OEM and technology suppliers that stay very isolated, I think, within the area of expertise. And that maybe is a function of how the industry has grown and how you buy. But if you look at some of the bigger and probably lower hanging fruit opportunities, that system thinking and ability to actually procure and implement efficiencies for those, I'd say, where the opportunities arise, it feels like there's a lot that could be achieved there. So on mineral processing in particular, it just feels like there's an awful lot of isolation across the value chain. For the hard to abate, where you can't efficiency your way to actually resolving, again, I come back to the model that Fortescue have been doing. Capital is global, and there's a lot of industries trying to decarbonize. The ability to give a firm demand signal where a Baker or several other companies have to allocate internal dollars and R&D dollars to customize these programs, to work with you, to go to regulators to get securing these projects. These are big investments for everybody. And I think the mining sector has a unique position if it's able to give visibility to end demand. That doesn't mean you need to sign the contract on day one, but you're all in it together with a view to how you can get there. And properly partnering, I do think that it can accelerate far faster than some sectors that just don't have that economic scale that unfortunately impedes the viability of a lot of those projects. So on the efficiencies, system thinking would be, I think, one that I think is a big opportunity, and leverage the scale with contractual structures where everybody is probably in it together, but there is a route to the scale that justifies the investment.
Yeah, so I mean, Katie was talking about certainty from government, but certainty from industry as well, really helps that supply chain.
I was going to say, I think that's one of the areas for Fortescue that I'm actually, really proud that, we're actually, moving on and doing something by 2030, because I think there's a bit of a sort of chicken and egg situation where, the technology providers and the OEMs are looking for, certainty, like you were talking about before they invest the capital in whatever it is. And then, some of our more risk-averse mining peers are kind of waiting for the thing to be proven and work operationally. And while that uncertainty happens, the sort of time ticks away and so on. And so I think from Fortescue, we've heard from some of our competitors that, the biggest challenge is that the technology doesn't exist to decarbonise. And we're going to have a fully operational load and haul system, fully battery electric, operating in 2026. So I think that excuse is going to go pretty quickly. And I think it's a really great opportunity for hopefully it'll get the mining industry moving a bit more about what is possible, and then provide a bit more certainty, to your point, for all the technology providers and OEMs out there.
Yeah, definitely. Mark, have you got any comments on the technology readiness equation? You were talking earlier about the massive capex that you need to make that initial sort of step in. Any sort of comments on what you're seeing from a technology readiness perspective? Obviously Fortescue's a front runner in terms of pushing the boundaries for technology.
Really, really small incremental steps. An electric aircon system in the cabin. So trucks and excavators. So trucks in an underground mining scenario spend 20 to 30% of their time idle. They keep the engine running while they're waiting to be loaded. I think we're not so well versed in the surface game, but I'm assuming excavators are spending a lot of time in pretty hot conditions up north, similarly as well, waiting for the load and haul or the trucks to arrive to load and haul fleet. So that's really basic technology that's out there now. So, a system that automatically sets off the engine when it recognises the truck is idle. We've done some research into that where we have a prototype system out on a 60-tonne truck underground at the moment, and it's saving 15 to 20% of fuel currently. So that's a really small incremental step. As far as the other technology, I can't talk other than the conversations we've had here. Mention the hydrogen replacement technology, but that is apparently, the claims is that can sort of save up to 30 to 50% of fuel burn as well. So these are small incremental steps. A lot, obviously, that technology needs to be proven up. But effectively, there are just a couple of small examples of technologies out there currently.
Yeah, that's great that there's some of the technology available that to aid you in your mission. I'm sure there's probably quite a few people in the room who would probably want me to ask this question of Katie, and because we haven't got audience participation, but where's the opportunities for your supply chain? You know, there's probably a lot of suppliers out there. You know, you've got that big costed plan. Like, when are those opportunities going to arise, and how can the supply chain get involved?
I would say they're already there. I mean, they're already there, right? I mean, I think the opportunity for Fortescue's suppliers is really to work on, you know, we're doing something that's pretty cutting edge globally, and, you know, that opportunity to prove up and develop technologies and concepts and ways of operating that they can then carry on to their other mining customers is pretty cool. And I think, you know, not definitely for some of our suppliers, it's, you know, some of our suppliers are changing because, you know, some people are more up for, you know, pushing forward aggressively with decarbonisation than others. But yeah, certainly I think, like for our employees, I think lots of our supplier base is actually really excited about the opportunity to go and do something that's different and new and so on. So.
And you're also looking at influencing your supply chain as well as your Scope 3 emissions?
Well, I mean, yes, but not even Scope. I mean, for us, our Scope 3, our downstream's a lot more significant. So shipping and obviously green steel production is a much more kind of significant footprint in terms of Scope 3 emissions. But even our Scope 1 emissions, so we have contractors who bring diesel equipment onto site, and we're going to get rid of all our diesel by 2030, so they're going to have to not bring diesel equipment onto site in the future. So we're working really closely with like hundreds of different suppliers around, you know, just being really clear about what our plans are. We're providing all the charging infrastructure, and then we'll work with them to, you know, get whatever they need to facilitate that transition. But because we're clear about it so far in advance, and because we're working around, you know, solutions for light vehicles and all the things ourselves, we're hoping we can help accelerate their own transition, so they've got that visibility when their assets are coming to the end of life. They can, you know, replace them with your green version, and we know the timing of you know, when we're going to have electrical infrastructure available on each of our sites.
And that's great that you're having that sort of butterfly effect in terms of the supply chain. Okay, I'm conscious that we are standing in the way of networking drinks. It's never a good place to be. So Chris, I'm going to ask you, we've had the whole magic wand type question, but I'm going to ask each of you, slightly different from the magic wand, but, you know, if you could change one thing in the mining and minerals sector that could help tackle the climate crisis, what would it be?
Well, I go back to the technical stream of things, and I suppose just people look at the world from the standpoint of the way it looks right now as an overall system. You know, we look at a mine and say, well, it's meant to be an open pit mine, and really, do we rethink the whole approach? I think just everyone is quite fixed in their thinking around this is how it needs to look, and how the whole supply chain works and how the competition works, and we will develop something in quite a pragmatic fashion. But when you look through and you're saying the challenge is now about reducing and improving efficiency and targeting things in a different way, you know, underground mines should be taking over what are open pit assets much earlier in the phase of works and starting to rethink. But those conversations are really challenging to have with clients who have just come through this transition across their whole lives, and they've spent 20 years in open pit mining, so they'll never look at something with a fresh set of eyes. And so I suppose, you know, the challenge is actually getting people to think that just because that's how we've seen it and we've done it for the last 50 years does not mean that's how mining needs to continue to look. And it's very difficult to find people who have that openness to essentially move away from their core and their base of understanding. You know, what you're doing there with in situ uranium and then putting a wind farm on top of that, every other asset out there is not really performing in that sort of future-facing or future-ready approach to something and rethinking. And I don't think getting people who in the industry generally to get there, if you asked 100 people in the room, I don't know if you would actually get, you know, a significant enough portion that would really change the game without everyone taking a hard look at themselves and reassessing.
So really sort of changing business as usual thinking. Greg, over
I think
to you.
we need to influence business, governments, anyone involved in it, to be totally technology agnostic. Let's look at whatever technology might work, even if it's a small step, large step, if it's a step on the way, just use it. Just technology agnostic. And a couple of key things there. We've got a crazy ban on the ability for nuclear power, modern nuclear power in this country. Just lift the ban. We don't have to do anything. We don't have to site any reactors. We don't have to agree on it. Just lift the ban and let the industry, the modern industry, consider it. That's one. And then the other is sustainability versus renewable. It's sustainable in biofuels, sustainable in other things. Let's use them. Let's use them. The airline industry is. We can. Let's just start using them.
Yeah, thanks for that. Tom?
So mine would be
One
across
thing.
all sectors. I'd have a global emissions tracking and pricing scheme, which would give everybody a level playing field and the economics to actually do the right thing economically across the globe to drive net zero.
That would be fantastic. I don't think I'd like to do the planning of that.
You said magic wand, so I was...
That's great. Marco?
I'll just go back to Greg's point earlier that we should be talking in this respect. We're aware of some companies have gone out and completely got rid of their diesel gen sets for hybrid solutions and everything like that. We should treat these changes, yes, we're all competitive in some ways, but we should treat these changes particularly like we do with safety. So safety shares within the industry, if anything happens between sites, even your ugliest, worst enemy, you share that information. And I think we should do the same thing with, in terms of sharing data when you're going renewable. We should open up the communications so that we can help our neighbours next door.
Katie?
Cool. I'd like all the boards and CEOs and executive leadership who are vested with this responsibility of stewardship of their companies in this really critical time of climate crisis to really think about what the future they want for their kids and their grandkids, and then reflect and set a really ambitious emissions reduction target so they can look those kids and grandkids in the eyes in 20 years' time and say that they absolutely did everything that they could to act on the science that is abundantly clear about what's driving climate change and what to do about it. Because I think, having worked on decarb for 3 years now, and from what we've heard over the last couple of days, I think the technology is definitely there, and what's missing is leadership.
Yeah, thanks for that. And, I started with the climate crisis and, what the latest studies are showing. And, yeah, it's phenomenally scary stuff. So, yeah, I think that's a really good point to reflect on as we close this. And thank you very much for all of your thoughts. I think there was some really good thinking about, systems, about certainty, about measurability and KPIs. And I think there was a lot of opportunities discussion as well. So, yeah, I just wanted I just wanted to say thank you very much to the panel and release you all to go and have networking drinks. And by all means, grab members of the panel when they come out if you've got further questions. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Janine.